Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the session on Sustaining Agile Success, Leading and Learning with Agility for a Dynamic Future. Now, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about why focusing on sustaining agility is so important, and it certainly goes hand in hand with staying resilient. And then I'll share some findings from my most recent research on leaders who are sustaining agile success, especially through volatile circumstances. So some of what I share is certainly going to reinforce the great work you're already doing, but I promise you're going to learn some insights and best practices that will help you be even more agile and resilient. So let me set the stage here. Many of you are aware, a few years ago, I wrote the book, The Agility Shift, and in it I shared a description of agility as your ability to respond effectively to the unexpected and unplanned and quickly turn challenges into opportunities. So that has two important aspects, that ability to be responsive and respond to the unexpected and unplanned, but also in many ways be entrepreneurial, your ability to turn challenges into opportunities. And you'll notice that this is not a dictionary definition. That's because the leaders that I work with don't care so much about what agility looks like on paper. They need to know what it looks like in action. And we know that in order to turn agility into action, we need to lead with an agile mindset. So I often say that leadership agility starts with this mindset shift. It's certainly critical to your success in highly volatile and high-stakes conditions. And we know that we skip over focusing on making this mindset shift at our peril. We've seen again and again that organizations that think of agility simply as an operational issue, or maybe they're adopting an agile framework, are soon disappointed in the results because they haven't approached it with a mindset of learning and adaptation, and one that truly is looking for opportunities even when, and maybe especially when, things don't go as planned. So before I go any further, I actually want to give you an opportunity to practice this mindset shift. And you can do it along with me or just pay attention and discover an exercise that you may want to take back to your team. So I call this exercise Fortunately, Unfortunately. And the wonderful thing about it is you can do it virtually with your remote teams. You can do it when you're all in the room together. But this is how it works. It's a great chance to get in that agile mindset, get warmed up before a team meeting, and just help people understand how critical it is to make this shift. So I'd like to get people in triads or uneven groups of 5 or 7, but the smaller group, the better. And it starts out by the very first person in the group coming up with something really fortunate. And I'll just give you a demonstration here, but think about your own fun variations of this as we go. So the first person might say something like, "Fortunately, I just won the lottery." But the next person has to turn that really fortunate thing into something very unfortunate, like, "Unfortunately, now all of your relatives are going to come out of the woodwork looking for money." But then we have to turn that unfortunate thing into something fortunate. So the next person says, "Fortunately, you're going to discover your sister who you were separated from at birth, your long-lost sister." And the next person turns that into something unfortunate. "Well, unfortunately, she was raised by wolves and doesn't even speak our language." But now we want to be sure we end on something fortunate. So it would be something like, Fortunately, I'm taking a course in animal linguistics, and this will be a perfect chance to practice." So you can see going around in what seems like just a silly game is a chance to build that agility muscle, that resiliency muscle, by going from the fortunate to the unfortunate. And I know all of you have had this experience. Even if the news is good, there's someone on your team who says, "Well, unfortunately that means," and they start already taking the team down. But when the unexpected happens, it's critical that we're able to move from the unfortunately, which is that human hardwired response. We know that we all have a negativity bias that's hardwired into us, but to intentionally make that shift from the unfortunately to the fortunately. So I share this with you as something to take back to your team. It's a playful way to re-energize your team, but also make the point that the mindset shift is something that's critical to sustain agility over time. And I often use this metaphor, and I'm sure this will resonate with many of you, that Agile organizations, and certainly Agile leaders and teams, are fit organizations. I mean, think about it. If you've ever made a new commitment to a new fitness regime, or you maybe recently wanted to recommit to your health and well-being, you know that there's a big difference between that initial commitment and what it takes day in and day out to sustain that commitment. And that's why I really, what I noticed in my client organizations, and I've noticed as a trend, that after that initial burst of enthusiasm around agility, the day in and day out mindset shift is something that starts to fade away. And so I was grappling with this with my clients, and that's really what led me to do the research for my most recent book, Staying in the Game, Leading and Learning with Agility for a Dynamic Future. And I'm going to share some of the discoveries that I made there, because it very much relates to all of your challenge in sustaining agility, not just sustaining that initial Agile adoption, which we know that we can operationalize agility, but what tends to fade over time is the commitment, that mindset shift, and that initial enthusiasm for really being in the learning and adapting space. So interestingly, just as I was starting this research and I was grappling with these challenges that I saw happening in my client organizations, I had returned to a passion from my youth, downhill skiing or alpine skiing. And some people think I'm crazy, but I've even gotten back into alpine racing. And one of the things I discovered, because I had a lot of barriers to overcome in making this shift, taking on this new challenge. First of all, I thought I was going to be one of the oldest people out there coming back at midlife. And I had a lot of nervosa about taking on this challenge, but I was happy to discover there were people decades older than me, people who were still racing in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. And that sparked some real questions for me. These were people that had been coming out year after year, weekend after weekend, in all conditions. So I started informally asking them, what was it that kept them in the game? What motivated them? What were the things that helped them stay agile and continuing to learn and grow? And interestingly, some of the answers that I found as I started expanding this research nationally was that the mountain became kind of a metaphor for the same challenges that the leaders and organizations I was working with were grappling with. And so I found some real similarities between the Agile leaders who were sustaining their success over time in business and those that were sustaining success on the mountain as well. And that's what led to this new kind of leadership model. And I'm going to share this with you. And as I share it, I'm going to invite you to be thinking about your own experience of some of these dimensions, because I have a feeling that some of the findings that I found with the research I was doing will resonate with some of the leaders that you work with, and very likely yourself as well. So this new kind of leadership is something that I call embodied Agile leadership. So I'll share these three aspects and then we'll dig a little deeper. So it starts with embodiment. And that means that not only do embodied Agile leaders embody agility, but they're also highly attuned and engaged to their whole selves. Now, one of the things that we sometimes forget is that when we bring ourselves to work, we're really operating not just from the neck up, we're bringing our whole selves, our intuition, our creativity, and that is a very embodied experience. And I'll share a bit more about what that looks like in just a moment. But I want you to think about what that feels like when you're highly attuned, highly engaged, that you're having a whole body experience, not just something that's happening from the neck up. And it certainly means that we're embodying agility, and this is that ability to quickly assess, learn and adapt in changing conditions. Now, this is, of course, critical on the mountain, but it's critical in business as well. And it also means embracing a little bit more expansive version of leadership. Leadership that means you're able to effectively respond to both challenges and opportunities, but it starts with self-leadership. I'm not talking necessarily about command and control leadership. I'm talking about the ability to actually get things done and spot challenges and opportunities wherever they are. And that kind of leadership in Agile organizations exists at all levels of the team, of the entire organization. So I'd like to make the distinction here between a disembodied leader and an embodied leader. A disembodied leader starts the day or maybe a new project with the mindset of, I hope nothing goes wrong. While an embodied leader starts the day thinking, hey, what are we going to learn here? What's going to happen? They're ready for new opportunities. So I discovered this again and again in the leaders that I interviewed, whether that was on the chairlift or in their organizations where they were thriving. But these embodied Agile leaders are also highly attuned to their game. That's why I called the book Staying in the Game. So I'm going to share some of these core elements of the game, and I want you to be thinking about your own game when you're experiencing these dynamics as well. So I call these the 4 Ps of the game. It's when we have a chance to play. That might mean play with new ideas. It's not necessarily the funny hats and games kinds of play. We experience living into our purpose, passion, and it's fun. We experience pleasure. So I want you to think about that in your own life and work, or maybe even think back to when you experienced it early in your life. This might be a time to go ahead and put some of these experiences in the chat, a word or a phrase. But when do you feel this level of engagement, or when at least 3, maybe all 4 of the 4 Ps are in action or you're experiencing them? Because we know it's that level of engagement, that level of playfulness and joy that is one of the things that keeps us engaged and helps us sustain our ability to perform at our best, and certainly our ability to stay agile. So with that in mind, that introduction to the game and introduction to embodied Agile leadership, I promised that we'd go a little bit deeper, because embodied Agile leadership, it turns out, doesn't happen by accident. So I'm going to briefly share the 4 dynamics of embodied Agile leadership and invite you to be thinking about what they look like and feel like in your own life and work. So it starts with meaningful identity. Again and again, as I asked Agile leaders what was important to them, what kept them in the game, they actually had a hard time making a distinction between those 4 Ps, or the game, and their own identity. In fact, so many leaders just said some version of, it's who I am. It's just who I am. Whether it's being out and engaged on the mountain, or how they show up at work, their attitudes of learning and engagement. So that sense of meaningful identity, it's when they're living into their purpose, and it also gives their life meaning. But what I discovered very quickly was that this meaningful identity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It actually happens in community. And this is the camaraderie and belonging. And interestingly, especially this sense of community first started when I experienced it on the race hill. This image is actually the top of our little race hill in the Midwest, and some of the enthusiastic racers that I have the opportunity to race with. But when we experience community, we experience a sense of camaraderie and belonging. And it's a big reason that people keep coming back. I heard this again and again, why people wanted to stay in their organizations, why they wanted to continue learning and adapting, and certainly why they wanted to come out to our little race hill weekend after weekend. It was that sense of being seen and feeling part of something that was bigger than themselves. But remember, the mountain is just a metaphor, and this has a real impact. Community has a real impact on business. And in fact, one of the leaders that who really communicated this to me was Chris Mikulski at H&M Clothing. He's the director of HR Americas, and he shared with me, I'll read the full quote and then share the business end of the quote here in just a moment. But he shared that community gets you through the challenges and the hard times, and it impacts our ability to be competitive because we inspire each other to do better. We inspire each other to show up. So if there's a connection at the other end of your decision, you're more likely to make that decision with that connection in mind. So this is really important. You'll be more inclined to make a decision that supports their success and to persevere past doubts or obstacles that we sometimes set for ourselves. So we know that fostering that sense of community and belonging is not just a feel-good idea. It's one that really relates to business performance and the performance of your team. So I want you to be thinking about the ways that you participate in community. This is not a passive experience. How you co-create it, how you help others feel that sense of belonging and participation, and how you experience it. So we know that community is really critical, and that has a direct connection to the next C of Agile, the Agile experience and sustaining embodied Agile leadership. Now, at its core, competition is about continuous learning and improvement. And I discovered two core dimensions of competition. Certainly there's the extrinsic version. Those are the benchmarks, the way we see how we're doing against other people, other organizations. That's certainly motivating, and it's one of the reasons that the things that keeps us in the game. But even more than that extrinsic competition, I found that the intrinsic was the one that really kept leaders who were staying in it day in and day out, year in and year out, were motivated by. And so that's the piece that's really critical. And I'll share a couple of quotes. First, from one of my favorite racers I encountered on the Hill. This is from Lilla Andrews. She's 82 years old. Actually, now this year she's 84. And she's still racing, even racing internationally in all disciplines. And she shared with me, it's not that I'm trying to beat another person. I'm trying to be faster and faster on the hill. And if somebody does it in 18 seconds and I do it in 19, yes, I want to get down to 18. So I guess I always have a goal of doing better when I'm going down the course. I guess that's just natural for me. So that sense of improvement, continuous improvement, and that's really what you see in the photo I shared here on the left, is that sense that every racer who comes down, this is just on our little tiny race hill, is they come down the hill, they go to the finish area. The first thing they do, actually the second thing they do after they check their time, is look up and think about, what could I have done better? Was it that third gate that I was a little late on? I want to get back up there and go again. And that is true across age ranges, that sense of a desire for continuous improvement. But I also have seen this consistently in business, and some of the greatest leaders are also embracing this kind of intrinsic aspect of continuous improvement and competition. So this is from Brian Davis, who is the head of View by Hub, which is an innovative digital insurance platform. He says, this is actually what separates, where the great leaders separate themselves from the average or even subpar. I would say to my organization at this stage, we're not failing enough. And so when I do performance reviews, everybody will tell you what they did well. To shift the focus, Brian starts his performance reviews by asking his leaders to, hey, tell me what you messed up. Because if you haven't really disrupted anything and had setbacks in something, you're probably not trying hard enough. So that's that commitment at the leadership level of continuous improvement. Don't just come to me with the good stories and your successes. I want to also lead by modeling how important continuous learning is, and I want you to share with me what you learned from those experiences. Now, those of you who are working in Agile methodology or Agile frameworks know that this is baked into most of these practices, taking some time for continuous learning and improvement. But I want to be sure you're bringing that mindset of true learning and not just trying to broad brush so that we go through the pro forma, but that we're truly digging for the lessons learned and how we were personally changed by some of the experiences that we've had. So competition and community are critical, and they grow directly out of and help co-create our meaningful identity. So let me share the final C of our model of embodied Agile leadership, which is commitment. Now, I discovered that commitment has really two core dimensions: intentionality and prioritization. And this shows up once again on the race hill. This was on a brutally cold day, the image that you're looking at here. In fact, if you can't see my dashboard, it's reading -2 degrees Fahrenheit, which roughly translates into -12 degrees centigrade. So pretty chilly day, and that's not even the coldest day we race on. But sitting in the car before I was getting out and suiting up to get ready, there's certainly a lot of draws to head the other direction. And I think this is nicely captured by Dick Cole. He's actually an 83-year-old ski racer. He also races on his snowboard. And he said, "Hey, of course there are days I don't want to get out of there at 6 a.m. My bed is warm. It's 10 degrees out. I have a conversation with myself. Hey, wouldn't it be nice to just stay here?" And then I say to myself, nope, just got to get out there. Got to do it. And that's that commitment, that sense of, hey, I've made this commitment. Maybe my friends are out there. Sometimes I tap into the camaraderie on those days. I don't want them to be out there without me, or I want to support their success, or I know when I get out there, I'll have fun and start learning and supporting and cheering each other on again. But we also know that commitment requires that constant ability to reprioritize. Commitment is not, about a set it and forget it initiative. It's about being in a very dynamic space. And this is where Chris Mikulski comes back in. I thought he had some really wonderful reflections on this from the work they do at H&M. He said, "We set off on an idea, we test things, we measure outcomes, and when we see a big opportunity, we shift. We constantly shift." And that is so critical to sustaining agility. It's, yes, we have a commitment, maybe it's our vision, our core values, or the outcomes that we've promised to our users or a client, but we're also constantly learning and adapting within that, and that's that dynamic space. So all three of these actually go hand in hand, and they co-create our sense of purpose, that meaningful identity. But as I say, they don't happen by accident. And it's an opportunity for you at every iteration to think about, what are you prioritizing? And then when things don't go as planned or something shifts, what are you reprioritizing? And very often, especially if you're working in an Agile framework, these conversations have to happen collaboratively and with your team. So I've introduced a new kind of leadership, embodied Agile leadership, which is brought to life through participating in and co-creating these 3 C's of community, competition, and commitment. And I wanted to pause here for a moment. I've just given you a taste, but to see if you see any commonality between these 3 dynamics that co-create our meaningful identity. Any commonality you see between community, competition, and commitment. So this is an opportunity. If you're seeing something right away or have some thoughts, go ahead and put those in the chat. Any commonality, anything that you think really ties these 3 together and helps us co-create that sense of purpose that's so critical to sustaining our success. So as you're typing, as you're thinking this through, I'll share some things that came to me. And this happened very organically as I was doing my research. Turns out actually that community, competition, and commitment share the same Latin root. They all share the root word of com or commetra, which means to come together. So, of course, community is all about coming together, but competition requires other people, and learning together requires other people, as well as does commitment. And we know that, as I've written about this in greater depth, that commitments that are made in community and that are made for the good of the greater good, not just for ourselves, are the ones that we tend to see actually come to fruition. So with this in mind, I want you to be thinking about not only what do these look like in your own life and work, but now to shift and think about what they look like in your organization or as a team. So if you're a leader on a team or even an individual contributor, how do you set people up for success to stay in the game? And this might be an opportunity also for you to use the chat. Maybe some of these dynamics have sparked some thoughts that you want to build on, maybe some examples of your best practices. For example, how do you foster community? That sense of belonging and camaraderie. How do you help people feel like they're connected, that they're being seen? How do you model competition and inspire continuous learning and improvement? What does that look like? Does it show up in your performance reviews or your performance conversations? Are you asking people, what are they learning? What's changing for them? And very important, how do you demonstrate commitment and practice both that intentionality, but also reprioritizing when it's needed, and continue to deliver value for your stakeholders, your end users. So here's a time to put a few of your thoughts, what's working for you, what are your best practices, anything that's inspired you here. And we'll have time in the Q&A to talk about this a little further, but we've got such great talent and wisdom joining us for this conference that I want to be sure that we tap that as well, and you have the opportunity to be learning from each other. And now I'm going to give you a preview of another resource, because this is such a resource-filled conference and comparative agility has been such a contributor to this field. I'm going to give you a quick preview of the Agility Shift Inventory for Leaders, and at the end of the webinar, I'm going to share the link to take the webinar yourself, share it with your team, or rather take the inventory yourself, share it with your team, as well as some additional resources. So the Agility Shift Inventory is something that grew out of my initial research, but it also directly relates to some of the core dynamics that I've just shared with you for staying in the game. So let me quickly preview these dynamics from the Agility Shift, and then you'll have a sense of what kinds of capabilities you can discover and how you can use the Agility Shift Inventory to build on your strengths. So the 6 dynamics of the Agility Shift began with the relational web, and that's very directly related to community. That's our ability to participate in and co-create a network of skills, knowledge, talent, and resources. And it's through that we're able to enact the other key elements of agility, which is our ability to stay relevant, responsive, resilient, resourceful, and very importantly, reflective. So the Agility Shift Inventory, in collaboration with Comparative Agility, we've created a very dynamic opportunity for you to assess your current strengths and areas of opportunity. You'll notice that in the Comparative Agility platform, once you move into it, the web has been replaced with some slightly different graphics, but you'll still have the opportunity to discover your strengths and opportunities in just the same way. The whole inventory only takes about 5, at most 7 minutes to complete. Once you enter the platform, you'll be taken to the start screen, have the opportunity to take the survey and get started. Once you've completed the survey, you will be able to aggregate your results and start to see all your results listed or graphically represented by these bars. And you'll notice that the highest bar is your area of greatest strength. I always encourage people to start there. I'll show you in just a moment how you can do a deep dive. This is your dashboard. But in addition to seeing your results, the very cool thing about the comparative agility platform is that using AI, it automatically generates your list of recommendations, your customized recommendations based on your results. So it gives you automatically some suggestions of where you can start to start building your agility capability. But each of these bars are dynamic, so the very cool thing is once you see your dashboard of results, you can then click on any of these bars. In this case, we're doing a deeper dive into, I believe, mindset, and each of these bars, as I was hovering over them, this is not a live version, but as you hover over them, will remind you what question you were answering and give you a better sense of where your strength and opportunity is within that particular dynamic. And then, of course, you can do the same thing in terms of your area of developmental opportunity. But I'm going to show you a couple of other really cool ways that the inventory can help you, and the comparative agility platform can help you build your capabilities. You can also create a personal improvement backlog, and that is the opportunity then to, in addition to adding some of the recommendations that you want to go back to, might be an article or suggested exercise to do with your team. You can also, those of you who are working with coaches or maybe doing your own continuous learning, you can add your own recommendations and add them to your personal backlog. These are all completely proprietary to you, and only you will see your results unless you choose to share them with a coach or someone else. The platform also enables you to take the inventory as many times as you would like. So I always recommend people do an initial baseline, but know that the results are best when you're thinking about your current team or work context. And very likely that context is going to change over time. So if there's a change, you might choose to take it again, or if you've implemented some of the practices and you want to take the inventory and see what shifted for you. I always remind people that this is intended to be dynamic, so we're not necessarily looking just for an upward trajectory. We're looking for this to be an opportunity and a resource for you to check out your strengths and opportunities in your current context, because those will always be shifting just as your context is shifting and your strengths are shifting to adapt to those. So we encourage you to use the Agility Shift inventory on an ongoing basis so that you know where you should be putting your energy and resources as you're building your agility capability. And finally, we have another wonderful aspect of the Agility Shift inventory, which is the opportunity to click on community and participate. You might be looking at some of the resources others have posted, but maybe you've come across a new resource or lesson learned that you'd like to post and contribute back to the community. So in many ways, the Agility Shift inventory gives you opportunities to practice the dynamics, put the dynamics I've shared with you into practice, and also continue to build on your strengths so that you're able to continuously sustain agility and adapt in a highly changing and dynamic future. So I promised that I would share access to the inventory. If you want to scan the QR code or simply go to the URL here, tinyurl.com/take-the-asi-l, you'll have the opportunity to get right to the inventory sign-in page, where you also will have access to a preview of the audible version, the text version of Staying in the Game, and also download a free chapter of the Agility Shift. So lots of resources if you go to that landing page, and then you've got a portal to get to the inventory. So I really encourage you to take advantage of those resources that we're able to offer in partnership with Comparative Agility. And now I want to open it up to a wider conversation. Let's build some community here, see what got sparked with your some of the concepts I've shared, some of the examples I've shared. maybe hear about your best practices, and I'm happy to dive deeper into any questions you have or any thoughts that you have as it relates to staying in the game.